Welcome to our channel, where dramatic, gripping, and deeply emotional stories are brought to life in the most vivid and authentic way. If this is your first time here, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming content. Now, get ready for a story that shook an entire neighborhood. Stay with us from beginning to end, and don't forget to leave a comment below to share how you feel about the ending. When I got the call from our family attorney confirming that I was now the official owner of Everpine Farm, I truly believed that peace had finally found its way back into my life. The 15-acre property sat right on the outskirts of town, a place my grandfather had built from the ground up, passing it down through generations as a symbol of resilience and freedom. I imagined waking up each morning to the sound of roosters, the scent of fresh grass, and the quiet embrace of nature, until I met Karen. Karen wasn't the kind of friendly neighbor you'd hope for when moving into a semi-rural community. No, Karen was the type of person whose complaints you could practically hear before she even opened her mouth. She was the self-appointed president of the HOA, a title no one dared challenge, and with a plaque on her gate that read, "President for Life," she treated the entire neighborhood like her personal kingdom. On my very first day, Karen marched straight onto my farm, one hand on her hip, the other clutching a clipboard, and her eyes scanning every inch of my land like a laser. That red barn completely ruins the visual harmony of the neighborhood. You're planning to keep those chickens? The smell will lower our property values. Worker trucks are not allowed to park that close to the fence. I politely smiled and explained that my farm wasn't under the HOA's jurisdiction. But to Karen, rules were what she made up herself, and anyone who didn't follow them would, in her words, feel the consequences. I never thought that raising chickens, planting vegetables, or putting up a simple barn could drive someone absolutely mad. But to Karen, everything about my farm was an offense to the order she believed she had created. And when I refused to bow down, she launched a war I never saw coming. A war against the smell of grass, the sound of roosters, and my right to live like a farmer on land that was rightfully mine. I used to think Karen's early complaints were just the grumblings of an unfriendly neighbor, the kind of knee-jerk reactions you'd expect from a cranky old woman. But I was wrong. To Karen, this wasn't a passing annoyance. It was a calculated, full-scale campaign, methodical, relentless, targeting me and everything tied to the farm. Just 1 week after I moved in, I received my first letter from the HOA, hand-delivered and stamped with a bright red seal, like it came straight from a courthouse. The reason? Karen was demanding I remove the wooden fence immediately due to its severe impact on neighborhood aesthetics. I shrugged it off. That fence had been there for nearly a century, and it was the only thing keeping my goats from wandering into my kitchen. I ignored it. But Karen didn't stop. The letters kept coming, each one more absurd than the last. One time, she demanded I repaint the barns using the approved neighborhood palette, which apparently meant beige. I refused, of course. The next day, one of my workers was stopped by Karen in the middle of the road and ordered to move his truck out of residents' line of sight. When I confronted her, she smirked and said, "We have standards here. This isn't some 19th century farm." She didn't stop at surface-level demands. Karen went after the heart of the farm, the animals. She launched a petition to ban livestock in the area, gathering signatures from her inner circle of HOA loyalists, a parade of beige-wearing, sunglasses-clad retirees who nodded in unison to every word she uttered. They showed up at my front gate, holding signs and chanting, "No barns, no roosters," as if I were running a toxic waste plant instead of selling fresh eggs at the weekend market. Karen also weaponized the local government. She made constant calls to the city office, accusing me of zoning violations, disturbing the peace with noise pollution, and even spreading animal waste odors. Every inspection ended the same. I was found to be in full compliance. But Karen didn't care. She kept filing complaints, as if sheer repetition could turn fiction into fact. That's when I realized, to Karen, I wasn't just an annoying neighbor. I was a symbol of everything she despised. Freedom, defiance, a way of life that didn't fit within the tight confines of the HOA empire she ruled. And when intimidation failed, I knew she'd escalate. She would take that next step, the one that made it clear this was no longer a neighborly dispute. This was war. I was stacking hay in the barn when I heard the wailing of sirens echoing down the road. At first, I figured it was just a patrol car passing by, until two police cruisers veered straight into the farm's driveway, their tires kicking up clouds of dust. I stepped out of the barn, hands still covered in straw, and the moment I spotted those familiar sunglasses and that smug, arms-crossed stance by the roadside, I knew immediately: Karen. Two officers stepped out, both looking deadly serious. One of them, tall, with eye cold as steel, flipped open a notepad. "We've received a complaint about unauthorized livestock activity and a possible zoning violation," he said. I sighed, resting my hands on my hips, and stared directly at the culprit, who leaned casually against the fence post as if she were waiting for applause. "Let me guess," I said. "Karen called, didn't she?" "It's Mrs. Davis," Karen corrected confidently. "And yes, I made the report. This farm poses a risk to the community, noise, odor, and safety concerns." I was about to respond when Karen suddenly pulled out a neatly organized folder and handed it to the officer. "I've gathered evidence," she declared. "Photos of trucks coming and going, lists of products sold at the farmer's market, receipts. It's all here. This is clearly an illegal commercial operation in a residential zone." I froze for a moment. Karen had dug that deep, even tracking my farmer's market sales. I sold vegetables, eggs, and milk, just like any other small farmer, but in her eyes, this was unlawful commercialization. One of the officers flipped through the documents, frowning. "Selling at a farmer's market doesn't automatically classify this as a commercial facility, ma'am," he said, but Karen wasn't backing down. "What about the trucks, the tractor, the hired help? Isn't that evidence of a business? I have photos." I bit down hard, trying to stay calm. "This is a working farm, not a weekend getaway. Everything here is legal, and I have the permits to prove it." Karen didn't seem to hear a word. Her eyes were locked on the officers, waiting, desperate, for a ruling that would finally eliminate the nuisance she'd been obsessing over. But just as the tension reached its peak, a sleek black SUV turned onto the dirt road. It rolled to a stop, and a man in a black suit stepped out, briefcase in hand. Karen squinted. "Who's that?" I couldn't hold back a grin. "Oh, Karen," I said quietly, "I think you're about to meet someone with real authority." The man in the black suit walked slowly toward us, sunlight glinting off his dark sunglasses, making his expression hard to read. No one said a word, not even the officers. They straightened up as he approached. I knew who he was, the person I had contacted last week after Karen began threatening to take me to court. I didn't expect him to come this quickly, but clearly he understood the level of madness I was up against. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," he said, his voice deep and steady. "I'm Daniel Whitmore, representative from the Oregon State Agricultural Protection Bureau. I've been dispatched in response to a report concerning unlawful interference with a protected agricultural operation." Karen raised an eyebrow, folding her arms tighter. "Protected? Who protects a chicken coop and a pile of manure?" Whitmore didn't even acknowledge the sarcasm. Instead, he turned to one of the officers and extended his hand. "I understand there are documents related to a complaint?" The officer handed him the folder Karen had provided, glancing at me with a hint of sympathy. Whitmore flipped through the pages, his expression shifting from curious to ice-cold. "Mrs. Davis," he said, looking up, "are you familiar with Oregon's Right to Farm Act?" Karen blinked. "What law?" "A legal statute passed to protect traditional farming operations from undue harassment by local entities, including HOAs." He pulled a booklet from his briefcase, flipped to a tabbed page, and pointed to a highlighted section. "You have the right to live next to a farm. What you don't have is the right to shut it down, just because you don't like the sound of roosters or the smell of damp soil." Karen was speechless. I stood still, quietly savoring the rare moment when the loudest voice in the room had nothing to say. Whitmore turned to me. "You're the legal owner of the property?" "Yes, sir. This farm's been in my family for 3 generations. All agricultural permits are up to date." "And you're only selling goods at the farmer's market, correct?" "That's all. No storefront, no signage, no advertising whatsoever." Whitmore nodded and turned back to Karen. then all accusations of commercial activity are baseless, and repeated actions aimed at disrupting a lawful farm operation fall under systematic harassment as outlined in Section 8 of the statute. You are at risk of facing a civil lawsuit and possibly criminal charges if this behavior continues. No one said a word. Karen had gone pale. The officers remained silent. And for the first time in months, I no longer felt like I was fighting this battle alone against the tyrant next door. Karen stood there, as if the blood had been drained from her face. The smug confidence she always wore had vanished, replaced by a stunned, trembling confusion, like someone who had never imagined being publicly outmaneuvered. But that moment of silence lasted only seconds. Like a spring wound too tightly, she snapped. "This is a joke," Karen screamed, pointing first at me, then at Whitmore. "You've all been bribed. He paid you off. The cops, the officials, all of you. This is a conspiracy against my HOA." Whitmore didn't flinch. Neither did the officers. They had heard enough. But Karen wasn't finished. She turned toward the small crowd now gathering near the roadside, curious neighbors drawn out from their pristine homes, lining the winding street between the neighborhood and my farm. "You see what's happening?" Karen shouted. "If we don't act now, this place will turn into a pigsty. Who wants to live next to crowing roosters, manure stench, and dirt trucks barreling down the road every day? We need to stand together. For safety, for order, for property values." But no one responded. Then an older man stepped forward, Mr. Reynolds, who lived on the corner. He crossed his arms. "Karen, you need to stop. You've gone too far." "What?" Karen choked on the word. "You've been handing out fines like candy, calling the cops over nonsense, making neighbors afraid to even park in front of their own homes. And now you're trying to drive out a farm that's been here for 100 years? Who do you think you are?" Another voice chimed in. Mrs. Monroe, standing just behind him. "We moved here for the peace and quiet, for the trees, the open space, for the feeling of being close to nature. But ever since you became HOA president, there hasn't been a moment of peace, just threats, complaints, and suffocating control." Karen's eyes darted from face to face, each one familiar, and no longer on her side. She trembled, her mouth opening as if to say something, maybe to argue, maybe to accuse again. But no one was listening. Even the officers had turned to Whitmore, awaiting further instruction. Surrounded by silence, Karen looked like a child who just had her favorite toy taken away. But she wasn't ready to surrender. I could see it in her eyes. The fury was still there, sharper than ever, because for the first time, she had lost. And for someone like Karen, losing was never something she could easily accept. The air had thickened, like a thunderstorm about to break. Karen stood frozen, her eyes darting from Mr. Whitmore to the two officers, to the gathering neighbors, none of whom were under her control anymore. In Karen's mind, perhaps she still believed she could turn things around, as long as she shouted loud enough and accused hard enough. But everyone was tired. Even her hysteria had lost its power. At that moment, a third patrol car quietly turned onto the farm's driveway, pulling up beside the two cruisers already parked there. A young officer stepped out, clipboard and a thick folder in hand. He nodded to his fellow officers, then addressed Whitmore. "Apologies for the interruption," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We just received confirmation from the county clerk's office. After reviewing the HOA's financial records, we've discovered several discrepancies. Mismatched invoices, inflated maintenance costs, and indications of embezzlement." Karen's face went pale. No, that's a mistake. It's a bookkeeping error. I didn't do anything wrong." The officer shook his head and reached for the cuffs on his belt. "We'll need to bring you in for questioning. This is just part of the preliminary investigation, but you are required to cooperate." "I'm the HOA president," Karen shrieked, stumbling backward. "I have rights. You can't arrest me like this. I'm the one who keeps order around here." "Not anymore," came Mr. Reynolds' quiet voice from behind. "We're electing someone new, someone who respects the community, not rules over it." Karen spun around, ready to shout something else, but there was no one left to listen. As the officer approached, she flailed like a child caught red-handed, but it was no use. The cuffs clicked cold and final around her wrists, silencing her with the sound of steel. As they led Karen past me, Her face twisted in fury and disbelief. She spat out one last burst of venom. "You ruined everything, you filthy farmer. If it weren't for you—" I cut her off with a calm nod. "It wasn't me. You did this to yourself." The car door slammed shut, and Karen, once the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, disappeared behind tinted glass. Silence hung in the air for a long moment. Then slowly, a round of applause began. Sparse at first, then stronger, spreading through the crowd. For the first time, this neighborhood was no longer under the shadow of her control. And for the first time, I truly felt free. Right here, on the land that had always been mine. 1 week after Karen's arrest, the atmosphere in the neighborhood had changed noticeably. No more suspicious eyes peering from behind curtains as I let the chickens out to graze. No more red-lettered threats tucked under my fence. The entire street felt eerily peaceful, like everyone could finally breathe without fearing they'd be fined for exhaling the wrong way. A temporary HOA board was formed shortly after Karen was taken into custody. They held an open meeting, for the first time, inviting all residents, including me, to speak. Inside the neighborhood's community center, I stood up, a little awkward at first, unaccustomed to being invited to speak rather than interrogated. But then I shared about my grandfather, about this land, about the crops I've nurtured season after season, and about everything I endured over the past months simply for not living according to the HOA standard. When I finished, the room went quiet, but it wasn't the uncomfortable silence that used to follow Karen into a room. This was the kind of silence that comes from people truly listening, something that had never existed here before. Then, one by one, neighbors began to speak, no longer afraid. People who had once stayed silent out of fear of Karen's wrath now started sharing their own stories. One had been fined for planting the wrong kind of flowers. Another had been threatened for letting their child play ball in the front yard. Someone else had received a written warning because their flag didn't match the HOA-approved shade of the American flag. My story, it turned out, was just the final drop in a glass that had long been overflowing. By the end of the meeting, the board announced a full audit of the HOA would begin. All the questionable expenditures, every vague citation and unexplained fine, they'd all be reviewed. As for Karen, she now faced 3 criminal charges: abuse of power, intentional harassment of lawful property, and financial fraud within a community organization. If convicted, she could be permanently stripped of her HOA authority and fined tens of thousands of dollars. But to me, the real victory wasn't in seeing her punished. I returned to my simple, honest days, laying out baskets of fresh vegetables at the weekend market, hearing the laughter of kids visiting the farm. A group of elementary school students came by for a tour, and one little boy asked, "Why did you become a farmer, sir?" I smiled and tousled his hair. Because I wanted to feed people with my own 2 hands, and because I wanted to live a life that's real. Justice doesn't always come with handcuffs or flashing red and blue lights. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through the return of respect, through the freedom to be yourself, without asking anyone's permission. The story of the farmer and his confrontation with HOA President Karen is more than just a tense neighborly dispute. It reflects a deeper reality about human rights, personal freedom, and the dangers of unchecked power. In today's society, it's not uncommon to encounter people like Karen, individuals who believe that even the smallest shred of authority gives them the right to control and impose their will on others. The real danger lies in this: when no one stands up, people like Karen push further, creating communities ruled by fear and injustice. One of the greatest lessons from this story is that resolve and legal knowledge are powerful tools for protecting oneself. The farmer didn't fight back with noise or anger. He responded with calm, preparation, and the support of the proper authorities. This is clear proof that when you know you're in the right and justice is on your side, there's no need to shout. The truth speaks for itself. The story also carries a powerful message about the strength of community when people are brave enough to speak up. For a long time, the neighborhood stayed silent, afraid of Karen's retaliation. But once one person dared to tell the truth, the silence broke. What followed was a ripple effect, and unity, even if it's just neighbors sharing their honest voices, is enough to bring down a HOA empire that was built solely on intimidation and fear. In real life, we can also learn to respect differences, like living next to a small farm or seeing someone choose a lifestyle that doesn't align with the majority. Diversity is part of freedom, and if everyone tried to make the world conform to their personal preferences, we'd lose what makes it truly colorful and alive. In the end, this story serves as a powerful reminder. Unchecked power doesn't create order, it creates chaos. And kindness isn't weakness, it's the most enduring strength there is. The farmer never attacked anyone, but his calm, steady resolve and unwavering decency inspired trust and ultimately support. In a world where control and coercion are becoming easier to spread, be the one who stands firm in your values. And if you ever meet a Karen in real life, don't be afraid. As long as you stand for what's right, the community will rise to stand with you. If today's story gave you that sense of satisfaction, seeing justice served and truth triumph over tyranny and abuse of power, then give this video a like. It's a simple way to show support for those who've been treated unfairly, just like the farmer in this story. If you believe that everyone deserves the right to live and work on their own land without being controlled by someone like Karen, then share this video with your friends and family. You never know, someone out there might be quietly dealing with a Karen of their own. And if you love powerful, heartfelt, and deeply human stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a future video. Your support helps keep these stories alive and reminds people everywhere that they're not alone. The story presented in this video is based on fictional scenarios and is intended for entertainment and inspirational purposes only. While the content may reflect real societal issues such as abuse of power, civil disputes, or community conflicts, all characters, events, and names have been altered or entirely fictionalized to ensure that it does not target any actual individual, organization, or community. We have no intention to defame, slander, or insult anyone through this content. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or real events is purely coincidental and unintended by the creators. Additionally, this video does not constitute legal, administrative, or civil advice. Any legal actions related to property disputes, HOAs, or land use rights should be taken only with the guidance of a qualified professional. Thank you for watching and supporting our channel.